Okay, I'm Erin Summer. So really the question is, don't win elections. And when we say third parties, we mean minor parties. Parties other than the two major parties. If they don't win in the political process, well then what do they do in the political process? They still exist, and rational beings make up these third parties. So what is their role in the policymaking process or in the political process if it's not winning elections? So I have here a chart of the policymaking system, and it's a chart you've seen once or twice before, and I'll be coming back to a lot throughout the rest of the semester. But with the chart, I want you to see in the policymaking system, it's a constant cycle. The people are at the start and end of it. So people have interests, problems, concerns, and they want the government way over here to address those issues. Well, we have over 300 million people in this country. How could those 300 million people tell the thousands of people in government what they want if there weren't something unifying people into big blocks of voters? And those would be the political parties. So we have people with their interests, concerns, problems, and through these various linkage institutions, particularly with this unit, parties and elections, that is how we tell our elected officials what we want from government. And so then the folks in the legislative branch, executive branch, can help deliver those policies that impact our lives. And issues, if they get addressed fully, then they fall out, but new issues will arise. Or maybe a particular interest comes up, the policy-making system delivers some new policy, but then there's tweaking needed after. So this is an ongoing cycle. Issues might stay in the cycle over and over again. Issues might fall off of the political agenda, so they're just not even discussed in this cycle. And while some issues might be resolved or die, new issues will be born. But we really rely on the parties to organize us so that we can convey to our elected officials, when you win office, because we voted for you in this party, we want you to do X, Y, Z with that power. And it's the two major parties that win elections in this country, at least at the national level. Other parties might win at the local level, but when we're thinking about national politics, two major parties win. But third parties exist. So back to the question, what do those third parties do if not win elections? Well, we need third parties because this is a democracy, and the First Amendment guarantees your right to freedom of speech, to speak your mind, your political opinions. It guarantees the right to assemble in groups of your choice and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So the First Amendment is what makes all parties possible, because you can freely assemble and you can freely speak as a party. Now, there are four kinds of third parties. Third parties, minor parties, I'll use those terms interchangeably. Third parties is more common to hear, but minor parties might make more sense in your head, because if you have multiple third parties, you might start to think there should be a fourth and a fifth. Third parties, that term is used in a two-party system to describe any party that's not one of the major ones. So your ideological third parties, those are going to be parties that have organized completely around an ideology. And when we did our ideology survey, you discovered if you were libertarian, populist, conservative, or liberal. And then if you were in the middle, you don't really have an ideology, you're moderate. So when a party forms entirely based on an ideology, we would call it an ideological party. The most prominent one today would be the Libertarian Party. It's a party based on the ideas of a libertarian ideology. When you're an ideological party, you are not going to be a moderate, compromising party. Okay, so your ideological party, because it's based on this coherent set of beliefs, circumstances don't change it as a party. It's rather uncompromising. That being said, it's going to be your longest lasting party. It's going to endure over time, because when circumstances change, its set of beliefs still applies. That's just the idea. It's an ideology that will apply to all circumstances. It's also going to be one that, while it exists for a long time, it's just not going to be one that has a likelihood of winning, because it is so ideological. It doesn't come to the middle where most Americans are. So the ideological party will persist, and it will be consistent, and the Libertarian Party is a good example to keep in mind to give you a picture of what an ideological party looks like. A single issue party is a party that arises around a particular issue. So folks who would join this party, folks who would run for elected office on this party, they're focused on one particular issue, and then once that issue is addressed, that party no longer has a reason to be around. So opposite the ideological party, this one is completely based on circumstance. And so when that issue is addressed, or whatever happens with the issue, it disappears, then the party disappears. So these are really short-lived. An example of this would be the Prohibition Party. An economic protest party is going to be one that forms out of an economic crisis, in which this party is sort of protesting that the government needs to get involved to deal with this economic crisis. The Greenback Party would be an example of that one. A splinter party is a party that forms as an offshoot from one of the major political parties. So you have two major political parties, Democratic and Republican parties, and a candidate, usually a splinter party is associated with a particularly charismatic person, splits off of that party and says, hey, I am this, but I'm taking the party this direction. Teddy Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party is an example of a splinter party off of the Republican Party. So those are four kinds of minor parties if you wanted to categorize them, and there could be some overlap. Often you could say an economic protest group is a single issue group, the single issue being the economy. And in class we'll go over ones in history and try to categorize them. So back to the question though. We have now categorized minor parties, but what do they do if they don't win elections? Now, we've sort of alluded to this, that because we are a free democracy, minor parties have to exist. So when you don't like one of the major parties, a minor party allows you the opportunity to still participate. This is an important political outlet. We want Americans to take their grievances, to take their concerns through the electoral process rather than rioting in the streets. So it is important to maintain a political outlet, that you have this freedom, that you may assemble, and that you may participate. That being said, I've already acknowledged that because of the way our electoral system is set up, minor parties just don't win. So the second effect I want to put here is a short-term effect, and it's a negative effect. It's a negative way to describe what third parties do in the political process. The spoiler effect refers to how when minor parties run and win votes, they win votes, essentially taking votes from one of the two major parties. And the major party it's going to take votes away from is probably the one more similar to it, thereby helping the party more opposite it. And the best way to get your head around this is to use an example. So I'll use the example of 1992. In 1992, the Republican on the ticket was George H.W. Bush. The Democrat on the ticket was Bill Clinton. So in the ideological spectrum, Clinton is left of center, Bush is right of center. Both pretty moderate, because that's the effect of having two parties. They get moderate in their politics. But in that year, 1992, Ross Perot was running as an independent. And he would fall on the spectrum on the right side, so on Bush's side. In that year, Ross Perot got 19% of the vote. So people voted for Perot that year, a lot of people. If they hadn't voted for Perot, what was the opportunity cost here? If they hadn't voted for Perot, who would they have voted for, assuming that they participated in the process? They probably would have voted for Bush. So they did not vote for Bush, nor did they vote for Clinton. But by not voting for Bush, Bush's relative vote in the election was going to be smaller than it would have been compared to Clinton's. So the spoiler effect describes how a third party essentially takes away votes, and particularly it spoils it for the major party that's actually similar to you. So that's a short-term consequence. It's a negative consequence of the third party. But parties learn lessons. The two major parties need to pay attention to current issues, current concerns from the people. And so if a minor party is able to garner a lot of support, that could be the make or break for the major party. So the major party needs to, one of them needs to adopt an issue to get those voters. So now let me do the 2000 election. In the 2000 election, it was Bush v. Gore, George W. Bush on the right side, on the Republican side, and Al Gore on the left side. And in that same election, in 2000, there was a third-party candidate who got 5% of the vote. That would be Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader was on the left side of the spectrum, and his main platform was an environmentalist platform. So he got 5% of the vote, which is a significant amount in a two-party system. That is also make or break for the two major candidates. So Gore didn't get Nader's votes, because Nader got Nader's votes. And there are many reasons why Gore lost the election, but that's one of the contributing factors. It's a significant contributing factor. So there was a lesson to be learned for both major parties, which is don't ignore the environmentalist concerns. There are people who are voting, who are participating in the electoral process that care about the environment, and they want their elected officials to put forth policies that are going to protect the environment and natural resources. And so which of the major parties has better adopted the environmentalist concerns and issues? That would be the Democratic Party. So long term, a third party might cease to exist. It might not win. But long term, if it shows that it does garner a lot of support in the electoral process, then that will put pressure on at least one of the major parties to adopt that set of interests. So think about when we watched the CGP Grey video, Gorilla and Leopard are the two major candidates at the end. But they cannot entirely neglect owls or snakes. And so when a minor party pops up with a new concern, if enough people turn out to vote to show their support, that communicates to the major parties, this needs to be on the agenda. So a small point of discussion for the 2016 presidential election. As I'm talking right now, it is the end of February in 2016, so we're still in the primaries, which are neither one's in the bag for the Democratic or Republican parties. But what's interesting about this election is we're seeing what would have been third-party candidates in the primaries. So on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders is a socialist, and he is running for president, but instead of running as a socialist, as a third party, he has actually jumped in the Democratic primary competing against Hillary Clinton. So my question, I don't know the answer, but this is one to ponder, is can this spoiler effect still persist for the Democratic Party? If Bernie ran on as a third-party candidate, Hillary would be the nominee for the Democratic Party. We don't know who the nominee for the Republican Party would be. But is he bypassing the spoiler effect by joining the primary, or will it somehow still play out? And on the Republican side, there are candidates that are not generally, they're not establishment Republicans like Donald Trump. But he could have ran as a third-party candidate. Instead, he chose to run in the Republican primary. Is he doing the same thing as Bernie Sanders? Are these two third-party candidates that are jumping into the primaries to combat the spoiler effect or to have a better chance of winning? And then finally, will this be a redefinition of the political parties? Will this be a critical election where we see a realignment? That, I don't believe so at this point, but the election hasn't happened, and we will see. Okay, so those are third parties and their effects on the political process.